The year was 2003, and I was barely 22 years old, sitting in the back of a Humvee somewhere in the middle of Iraq. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, and the only sounds were the rumble of our engine and the occasional crackle of radio chatter. My squad had been on patrol for hours, checking abandoned buildings and securing supply routes. It was supposed to be routine, but then Martinez, our driver, slammed on the brakes so hard I nearly flew into the seat in front of me. He was staring straight ahead, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. When I followed his gaze, I saw what had made him stop. There, about 50 yards away, was a figure standing perfectly still in the middle of the road. It looked like a person, but something was wrong. The way it stood, the way it didn't move, even with our headlights blazing directly at it. "What the hell is that?" whispered Johnson from the gunner's position. None of us had an answer. We sat there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, watching this thing that shouldn't have been there. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. Not walked away, not moved to the side, just gone. Vanished into the desert night like it had never existed at all. We never reported it. How could we? What would we have said? That we saw a ghost? That we encountered something that defied explanation? In the military, you learn quickly that there are certain things you keep to yourself, certain experiences that don't make it into official reports. But here's the thing that's been eating at me for over 20 years now. We weren't alone. Not by a long shot. Welcome to a phenomenon that stretches across every branch of the military, every conflict zone, and every generation of service members. From the muddy trenches of World War I to the mountain ranges of Afghanistan, from the jungles of Vietnam to the deserts of Iraq, soldiers have been encountering things that shouldn't exist, things that challenge everything we think we know about reality itself. I'm talking about unexplained sightings that have been documented for centuries, encounters with beings that seem to exist outside the natural order, experiences so bizarre and terrifying that grown men and women, trained killers who faced down enemy fire without flinching, refused to speak about them, even decades later. Why do so many soldiers see the unexplainable? That's the question that's been haunting military personnel for generations. And today, we're going to dig deep into this mystery. We're going to explore the documented cases, examine the theories, and try to understand why combat zones seem to be breeding grounds for encounters with the impossible. Over the next several episodes, we're going to take you on a journey through some of the most compelling and disturbing accounts ever recorded. We'll hear from veterans who've broken their silence after years of keeping these experiences buried. We'll examine official military documents that acknowledge these encounters. And we'll explore the psychological, environmental, and possibly supernatural factors that might explain why the battlefield seems to be a gateway to the unknown. But first, let me tell you why this matters. Why should you care about what a bunch of soldiers claim to have seen in the heat of battle? Because these aren't just random stories told around campfires. These are accounts from trained observers, people whose lives depended on accurately assessing threats and identifying targets. These are individuals who underwent rigorous psychological screening, who were taught to remain calm under pressure, who were specifically selected for their mental stability and reliability. When a Navy SEAL tells you he saw something that defied physics, you listen. When a Marine sniper, trained to observe and report with precision, describes an encounter with something that shouldn't exist, you pay attention. When multiple members of an Army unit independently report the same impossible sighting, you start to wonder if there's something more going on than mass hallucination or combat stress. The military has always been a breeding ground for legends and folklore. Ghost stories, supernatural encounters, and tales of the unexplained have been part of military culture since the beginning of organized warfare. But what we're seeing in modern conflicts goes far beyond traditional ghost stories. We're talking about encounters with entities that seem to actively interact with our forces, that appear to possess intelligence and purpose. These aren't fleeting glimpses of shadowy figures or unexplained sounds in the night. These are face-to-face encounters with beings that seem to exist outside our understanding of biology, physics, and reality itself. Creatures that appear to be studying our soldiers, testing them, or perhaps even hunting them. The reports share disturbing similarities across different wars, different theaters of operation, and different generations of service members. Tall, pale figures moving with impossible speed and agility, beings that seem to appear and disappear at will, entities that demonstrate intelligence and awareness, but operate according to rules that we don't understand. Some of these encounters have been documented in official military reports, though often buried in classified files or dismissed as the products of stress and sleep deprivation. Others have been shared quietly among veterans, passed down through informal networks of trust and mutual understanding. Still, others have remained locked away in the minds of those who experience them, too afraid or too traumatized to share their stories with anyone. What makes these accounts particularly compelling is their consistency. When you hear the same types of descriptions from soldiers who've never met each other, who served in different conflicts decades apart, who have no reason to coordinate their stories, you start to realize that something significant is happening out there. The skeptics will tell you that these encounters can be explained by the extreme stress of combat, by sleep deprivation, by the psychological toll of warfare. They'll point to studies showing how the human mind can create vivid hallucinations under extreme duress. They'll argue that soldiers, isolated and afraid, are simply seeing what they expect to see, creating monsters where none exist. But the skeptics can't explain why these encounters often involve multiple witnesses. They can't account for the physical evidence that's sometimes left behind. They can't explain why seasoned veterans, people who've seen the worst that humanity has to offer, are genuinely terrified when they recount these experiences. There's something else happening here, something that goes beyond simple psychological explanations, something that suggests our understanding of reality itself might be incomplete. Throughout history, battlefields have been places where the veil between worlds seems thinnest. Ancient warriors spoke of gods and demons walking among the living and the dead. Medieval knights reported encounters with supernatural beings on the fields of honor. Even in more recent conflicts, soldiers have described experiences that challenge our modern, rational worldview. Perhaps there's something about the intense emotions, the proximity to death, the breakdown of normal social structures that creates conditions where the impossible becomes possible. Maybe combat zones exist in a state of heightened reality, where the rules we take for granted no longer apply. Or maybe, just maybe, these beings have always been there, watching and waiting, drawn to the chaos and violence that defines human conflict. Maybe they feed on our fear, our aggression, our desperation. Maybe they're studying us, trying to understand what makes us tick, what drives us to destroy each other with such creativity and persistence. The truth is, we don't know. We can't know, at least not yet. But what we can do is listen to the stories, examine the evidence, and try to piece together a picture of what's really happening out there in the dark corners of our world. That's exactly what we're going to do in this series. We're going to take you deep into the shadows of modern warfare, where reality bends and breaks under the weight of human conflict. We're going to explore encounters that will challenge everything you think you know about the world we live in. We're going to start with the most documented cases, the ones that have left paper trails and official records. Because despite what you might think, The military has been tracking these encounters for decades. They just haven't been talking about them publicly. In 1952, the U.S. Army established what they called the Anomalous Phenomena Investigation Unit, though that wasn't its official name. Buried deep within the intelligence apparatus, this small team of officers and civilian contractors was tasked with investigating unexplained encounters reported by military personnel. Their files, many of which have been declassified in recent years, paint a picture of systematic documentation, spanning multiple conflicts and theaters of operation. The patterns they identified are remarkable in their consistency. Encounters typically occur during periods of high stress or imminent danger. They often involve multiple witnesses, usually between 2 and 6 personnel. The beings described share common humanoid in appearance, but distinctly non-human in movement and behavior. They seem to possess advanced awareness of their surroundings and demonstrate what can only be described as tactical intelligence. But here's where it gets really interesting. These encounters aren't random. They follow geographical patterns clustering around specific locations that seem to attract this kind of activity. Ancient battlefields, areas with high concentrations of violent death, regions where the local population has historical accounts of supernatural activity. It's as if these places have become permanently altered by the violence that occurred there. Take the Ardennes forest, for example. This region of Belgium and France has been the site of countless battles throughout history, from medieval conflicts to both world wars. American soldiers fighting in the Battle of the Bulge reported encounters with pale figures moving through the trees, beings that seemed to glide rather than walk. These weren't isolated incidents. Company commanders documented multiple sightings, often by different units operating miles apart. The reports describe entities that appeared to be observing the battle, positioning themselves on high ground where they could watch the fighting unfold. Some soldiers reported making eye contact with these beings, describing an intelligence behind their gaze that was both alien and deeply unsettling. When approached, the figures would simply vanish, leaving no trace of their presence. Fast forward to Vietnam, and the pattern continues. The jungle warfare of Southeast Asia created perfect conditions for these encounters. Dense vegetation, extreme stress, and the constant threat of death combined to create an environment where the impossible seemed routine. American forces reported encounters with beings they couldn't classify, creatures that moved through the jungle with impossible silence and speed. One particular incident, documented in classified after-action reports, involved a Marine reconnaissance unit operating near the Cambodian border. The team was conducting surveillance when they observed what appeared to be a group of extremely tall, pale figures moving through the jungle canopy. These beings seemed to be tracking the Marines, maintaining parallel movement for several kilometers before disappearing entirely. The team leader, a decorated veteran with multiple tours under his belt, reported that these entities moved unlike anything he'd ever seen. They seemed to flow through the trees, covering ground at speeds that defied human capability. When the Marines attempted to pursue, they found no trace of passage, no broken branches or disturbed foliage. It was as if the beings had simply materialized and then vanished back into the ether. What makes these Vietnam encounters particularly significant is the independent corroboration they received from other sources. Australian and South Korean forces operating in the same regions reported similar sightings. Local Vietnamese civilians, when questioned through interpreters, spoke of ancient spirits that had been awakened by the violence of war. They described beings that had always existed in the deep jungle, but had become more active, more visible since the fighting began. The Gulf War brought a new dimension to these encounters. The desert environment of Iraq and Kuwait provided little cover, making sightings more dramatic and undeniable. tank crews reported beings that seemed to emerge from the sand itself, moving alongside armored columns before disappearing into the heat shimmer of the desert. Apache helicopter pilots described encounters with flying entities that matched their speed and altitude, pacing their aircraft for miles before breaking off and vanishing. One incident that has become legendary among Gulf War veterans involved a convoy of supply trucks moving through the desert at night. The convoy commander reported seeing a group of tall figures standing in perfect formation alongside the road, watching the vehicles pass. These beings were clearly visible in the truck headlight, standing motionless as the convoy rolled by. When the rear guard turned to look back, the figures were gone. The convoy stopped to investigate, and what they found defied explanation. The sand where the figures had been standing showed no footprints, no disturbance of any kind. The temperature in that specific area was noticeably colder than the surrounding desert, and several soldiers reported feeling an intense sense of being watched, even though nothing was visible. But it's the conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq that have produced the most detailed and disturbing accounts. The prolonged nature of these deployments, the advanced technology available to document incidents, and the sheer number of personnel involved have created an unprecedented record of unexplained encounters. Combat outposts scattered across the mountains of Afghanistan became focal points for these sightings. Soldiers manning observation posts reported seeing figures moving across ridgelines at impossible speeds, covering terrain that would take hours to traverse in mere minutes. These beings seemed to be conducting their own surveillance, observing American positions with the same systematic approach used by human intelligence operatives. Night vision equipment captured images that defied explanation. Thermal imaging showed heat signatures that moved unlike any known animal or human. The beings appeared to generate their own heat patterns, signatures that were distinctly different from anything in the military's identification databases. Some soldiers reported that these entities seemed aware of the surveillance technology, actively avoiding areas covered by cameras and sensors. The psychological impact of these encounters cannot be overstated. These are individuals trained to face the worst humanity has to offer. Yet many of them describe these experiences as more terrifying than any conventional combat they've endured. The fear isn't just of the unknown, but of something that seems to exist outside the natural order, something that operates according to rules we don't understand. What's particularly disturbing is how these encounters seem to be escalating. The frequency of reports has increased dramatically over the past 2 decades, and the beings described seem to be becoming more bold, more direct in their interactions with military personnel. Some soldiers report being approached by these entities, experiencing what can only be described as telepathic communication or mental intrusion. The implications are staggering. If these accounts are accurate, it means our understanding of reality is fundamentally flawed. It means there are intelligences operating in our world that we've never recognized, beings that may have been watching and studying us for far longer than we realize. The military establishment has been grappling with these reports for decades, trying to find rational explanations for phenomena that seem to defy logic. Sleep deprivation, combat stress, environmental factors, mass hysteria. Every possible conventional explanation has been explored and documented. Yet the encounters continue, and they're becoming impossible to dismiss. What's most unsettling is the evolution of these experiences. Early reports from World War II described fleeting glimpses, shadowy figures at the edge of vision. Vietnam brought closer encounters, beings that seemed more willing to be observed. The Gulf War marked a turning point, with entities that appeared to be actively engaging with our forces. And now, in the 21st century, we're seeing encounters that go far beyond simple observation. Modern soldiers report being followed by these beings, sometimes for days at a time. They describe feeling watched, constantly sensing an intelligence that seems to be studying their every move. Some have reported finding strange markings near their positions, symbols carved into rock or etched into the ground that don't match any known language or military designation. The technology angle is particularly disturbing. Multiple reports describe these entities demonstrating an apparent understanding of our equipment, our tactics, our capabilities. They seem to know exactly how to avoid our sensors, how to move through our defensive perimeters without triggering alarms. It's as if they've been studying us long enough to understand our methods better than we understand theirs. Consider the implications. If these beings possess the intelligence and capabilities that soldiers describe, what does that mean for our understanding of security? How do you defend against something that can appear and disappear at will, that seems to possess knowledge of your every movement, that operates according to rules you don't comprehend? The COVID-up aspect is equally troubling. Despite decades of documented encounters, official military channels have remained largely silent on the subject. Reports are filed, investigations are conducted, but the results are buried in classified archives. Soldiers who attempt to discuss their experiences publicly often find themselves facing disciplinary action or psychological evaluation. This culture of silence has created an underground network of veterans who share their experiences privately, away from official channels. They gather in online forums, at veteran reunions, in quiet conversations at VFW halls. They speak in whispers about things they've seen, things that have haunted them for years or decades. The pattern is always the same. Initial disbelief, followed by the gradual realization that they're not alone in their experiences, relief at finding others who've seen similar things, followed by frustration at the official denial and dismissal of their accounts. Many of these veterans carry psychological scars, not just from conventional combat, but from encounters with something that challenged their fundamental understanding of reality. What makes their testimony so compelling is the consistency across time, geography, and military branches. A Marine who served in Fallujah describes the same types of beings that an Army Ranger encountered in the mountains of Afghanistan. A Navy corpsman attached to a SEAL team in Iraq reports experiences that mirror those of an Air Force security specialist at a forward operating base in Syria. These aren't coordinated stories or shared delusions. These are independent accounts from individuals who often didn't know each other, who served in different units, different locations, different time periods. Yet, the details align in ways that suggest they're all describing encounters with the same phenomenon. The question that haunts everyone who seriously studied these accounts is simple. What are we dealing with? Are these beings from another dimension, another planet, another time? Are they remnants of an ancient intelligence that's been sharing our world far longer than we realize? Or are they something else entirely, something that exists in the spaces between our understanding of what's possible? The truth is, we may never know for certain, but what we can do is listen to the stories, examine the evidence, and try to piece together a picture of what's really happening out there in the dark corners of our world. Because ignoring these accounts, dismissing them as products of stress or imagination, doesn't make them go away. It just ensures that we remain unprepared for whatever we're actually facing. The next time you meet a combat veteran, look them in the eye and ask if they've ever seen something they couldn't explain. Don't be surprised if they hesitate. If they look around to make sure no one else is listening, don't be shocked if they tell you a story that challenges everything you thought you knew about the world we live in. Because the truth is, out there, carried in the memories of thousands of men and women who've served in the darkest places on Earth. They've seen things that defy explanation, encountered beings that shouldn't exist, and lived to tell about it. Their stories are a window into a reality far stranger and more complex than we ever imagined. The unexplainable isn't just something that happens to other people in other places. It's happening right now in conflict zones around the world, to soldiers who signed up to defend their country and found themselves face to face with mysteries that will haunt them for the rest of their lives. So, why do so many soldiers see the unexplainable? Maybe the better question, what are they seeing? And what does it mean for all of us? The answer to that question might be more important than we realize. Because if these encounters are real, if there really are intelligences operating in our world that we don't understand, then everything we think we know about reality, about our place in the universe, about what's possible and what's not, might need to be reconsidered. The fog of war has always hidden terrible truths. Perhaps it's time we started paying attention to what's been hiding in that fog all along.